Good evening and welcome to the University of Tasmania's Island of Ideas Public Talks series and to our special talk this evening, The Value of Independence, with His Excellency José Ramos-Horta, Nobel Peace Laureate and President of Timor-Leste. His Excellency will share some of the lessons learned from Timor-Leste's path to freedom. My name is Professor Nicholas Farrelly, and I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Tasmania, responsible for Southern Tasmania. As we gather here to discuss the challenges of securing peace and independence, the University and I would like to acknowledge that this event is being held and broadcast from Laureate, Tasmania, the traditional lands of the Palawa people, who have been custodians of this place for over 1,000 generations. We recognise and acknowledge their history of sharing and caring. They also, as you all appreciate, have a history of dispossession and colonisation. Colonial policies caused the ongoing economic disadvantage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, reflected today in great disparities in income, housing and health outcomes, which continue to persist across generations. Our speaker, the President, will tonight share with us the journey of the people of Timor-Leste through their decolonisation to independence. The University and I on this occasion pay our respects to elders past and present and to all members of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities who have joined us here this evening. Now to the topic of this evening's Island of Ideas talk. On the 25th anniversary of Timor-Leste's historic vote for independence, following years of resistance, as you all know, against foreign occupation, President José Ramos-Horta will reflect on the importance and fragility of national independence and how, in particular, the stability of the Asia-Pacific region relies on respecting our differences and confronting the many shared challenges together. This event, like the others in our Island of Ideas series, reflects the University of Tasmania's commitment to fostering conversations that address real challenges facing our global community. From here, on our wonderful island home, we aim to provide a platform for informed discussion led by experts and leaders and guided by academic insights on the issues that matter to us all. We know that these conversations are an important part of our university's role. A spirit of connection, collegiality and community dates back to the university's founding in 1890 and remain core to our values today. His Excellency José Ramos-Horta was Timor's first foreign minister when the country declared independence from Portugal in 1975. Following Indonesia's invasion later that year, he became the international voice of the Timorese people. In 1996, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work towards a just and peaceful solution to the conflict in East Timor. When Timor-Leste became a new nation following the popular consultation of 1999, he returned from exile to serve as the new nation's first foreign minister. From 2006 to 2007, he served as Prime Minister, and from 2007 to 2012, he served his first term as President. In 2022, he came out of retirement and returned to the presidential palace. His new presidency was inaugurated on the 20th of May, which was, as it happens, the 20th anniversary of the restoration of Timor-Leste's independence. President Ramos-Horta, welcome back to our University of Tasmania. We have great pleasure in welcoming you to the lectern, and thank you very much for your remarks this evening.
I will skip the formalities of protocol and acknowledging everybody all protocol observed. It is great to be back in Tasmania, in Hobart. This is not my first trip here, my first visit here, actually my very first. June 74 was my first diplomatic exercise, traveling on my own to Jakarta. Little to no money. I ventured into Jakarta. Of course, I knew 2 or 3 people there. I managed to meet with the then Foreign Minister of Indonesia, Pak Malik, Adang Malik. I traveled through Jakarta in Becak, in a scooter of a friend, Hari Kawilarang, a journalist deceased. I was also taken around by Agus Parenquan, a journalist for Kompas, a Catholic newspaper, and the best newspaper till today in Indonesia. And I was given some little money by another journalist friend, Saban Siajian. At the time he was with Sinar Harapan, later the Jakarta Post. So my first entry into the world of diplomacy began when I was in my 20s, in that very informal way. I went to meet Pak Malik, arrived there on a scooter. Then I came to Australia, July, the following month, and went first to Canberra. I was hosted by a great human being, friend, James Dunn. But I met many other people throughout Australia over those years. Then the invasion came, December 75, still inexperienced, had never been to a big city in my life. I was instructed by our super charismatic leader, Nicolau Lobato, to go to New York to advocate the cause of Timor-Leste, arriving there in the midst of the North American winter, real winter. And I stayed in what was at the time a very cheap hotel, Tudor hotel, and much more expensive now. But at the time I paid $10 a night. And it was very near the UN. That began my journey with international diplomacy. I thought I would go back to my country by January 76. Not even having arrived in New York, Indonesian forces had invaded Timor-Leste. I arrived in Lisbon 7 December 75 in the late afternoon. In the morning, early morning hours in Timor time, invasion forces had entered the country. And then meeting first with Portuguese officials, then went on to New York. Portugal at the time, as the formal, nominal administrative power of the territory, convened, demanded a meeting of the UN Security Council. Under Security Council rules of procedure, Rules 33, I was invited to speak. So that was my first address ever to the UN Security Council, and I became known as the youngest person ever to address the UN Security Council. Whether that was factual or not, I never bother actually researching. Who cares? And anyway, but the Security Council adopted a unanimous resolution, unanimous, calling on Indonesia to withdraw its forces from Timor-Leste without delay, quote unquote. And that seemed to have been a great diplomatic feat. But that was also my first lesson in organized international hypocrisy. And because it is a unanimous vote, and that meant France, UK, People's Republic, China, and the then Soviet Union all voted in favor of the resolution. And the Security Council resolution, particularly of that nature, is binding. And it could have meant that those who enable an invasion like that, they would take action to implement the main operative wording of the resolution, which says withdraw all its forces without delay and respecting territorial integrity of the territory and the right of the people of Timor-Leste to self-determination and independence. Well, guess I went back home only on 1st December 99. So I end up being in exile for 24 years. Through those 24 years, the world changed dramatically. I was in Geneva. I used to go to Geneva a lot every year. You know, part of my work was focused on the UN in New York, but also soon I realized more powerful than the UN was the biggest power in the world, and that is the United States. The United States can be considered enabler of peace, can be enabler of freedom, but also can be enabler of instability, of wars. Depends in the White House, who is in the White House, in the US Congress, Senate. It depends on public opinion, etc., etc. And of course, I spent some time during my years in the United States. I spent some time going frequently to Boston to spend hours with a great American, and that's Noam Chomsky at MIT, not to learn linguistics, and because Chomsky didn't speak that many languages, although he's a great professor of linguistics, he spoke only English, and I think probably understood French or understood. Anyway, I would go, wonderful human being. I actually first time met him, not in Boston, but in Italy, in the Scuola Normale Superiore in Pisa. We were planning a conference, Solidarity Conference on East Timor in 1981 in Lisbon. And I got the task of looking for Chomsky to get him to come to our conference. I was told that summer he was in Italy, so I went there. Famous professor, and I walk in, there he was, obviously very, very young. And he was wearing a bit like me today. He was wearing jeans, and not a jean jacket, a shirt and jeans trousers, and with his feet on the desk, and that was the famous Chomsky, and that's how we met. And I said, please, we need you to come to the conference in Lisbon. He said right away, yes. And we became friends ever since. So I went to Boston numerous times to sit with him, to hear his views on US foreign policy. But I was careful. I was not only listening to John Chomsky, I took some courses at Columbia University under Professor Zbigniew Brzezinski. I surely am mispronouncing his two names, but you know, he's the famous professor, former National Security Advisor Jimmy Carter. So I took a course with him. His course was always attended by like 200 students. And of course, you have different views. And but the U.S. was and today much less an enabler of anything, because we are back in some multipolar power distribution in the world. And whether the U.S. like it or not, whether we agree or not, the reality is there are some powers today that, unlike in the past, they are ready to challenge United States monopoly on power. And when I say monopoly on power, it's not in any negative way. if in a democracy, in Australia, for instance, is ever one of the party win absolute majority and decide to have monopoly on all the decisions, they will have all the decisions. That's what democracy is about. So, so I spend a lot of time lobbying in the US Congress, but also traveling frequently in Europe by bus, by TGV, or by other slower trains of poorer countries in Europe, rarely by plane in Europe. Sometimes I'll go by bus from Lisbon to Geneva, more than 30 hours with a number of stops. And you'd pay only 100 Swiss francs for the train. You would have to pay 400 Swiss francs for an air ticket. So, or all the way to Rome by bus. And so there was my end. I went to Latin America, almost all the Latin American countries, many in Africa. How I end up in some African countries, I still cannot remember how I end up, for instance, in Mali, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Senegal. Back then, they're very difficult to travel at the time. All of this just to say, from day one of our struggle, we understood in the region two major interests, Indonesia and Australia. So I went to Indonesia June 74. I came to Australia July 74. And then I was sent to New York just before the invasion. We were expecting the invasion. Well, I was in Geneva one time, one of my many trips to Geneva, in that February, March, during the annual sessions of the Commission on Human Rights. They changed the name to Human Rights Council. At the time, it was Commission on Human Rights. Almost futile exercise then, and now futile exercise on human rights issues, thematic and country situation, wide range of topics. I went there just focused single-handedly on the East Timor question. One day, in a car, driving from Nyon. Nyon is a town 50 minutes by train, driving a bit longer to Geneva. And at 8 a.m. one morning, I heard a story coming out of the BBC. It was the story about a Soviet cosmonaut who had gone into the space in one of those record-breaking missions in space. As the cosmonaut, I remember his name, Colonel Nikolai, preparing his spacecraft to return to Earth, he got the message, radio message from Moscow: do not return, your country no longer exists. Circle the Earth a few more times until you figure out where you should go. I felt sorry for the man. I started imagining how one can be so lonely. You know, one can be lonely in your homes. You can be lonely in a cafe, alone in the winter, or lonely walking the street, but lonely in the space. Less options, even less options. But then they told him where to land, to prepare the spacecraft to return to Earth, and he landed somewhere in Kazakhstan, a different country. His passport was no longer valid. This is only to say nothing is really impossible in this world. When you have the imagination, the beliefs, the faith, then nothing is impossible. So when I saw that story, even the mighty Soviet Union with their annual parade of intercontinental ballistic missiles that to scare the United States, that all provoke John Kennedy for almost starting World War III. And then suddenly one day it just collapsed into itself under the weight of the discredit of that political, ideological system that did not deliver the freedoms of the people, did not deliver the prosperity that it had promised. Not a single shot was fired. So I said, then easier for other situations also to be reversed. So I work even harder and lobbying the powers that be, etc., with that example. And then there was the beginning of rapid changes. Mandela was free, the Baltic states were free, then the former Eastern European countries were free, and then a succession of the democracy movements in Latin America and Africa, etc. In Asia, Cory Aquino, housewife. I knew her husband, Ninoy Aquino. I met Ninoy when he was a refugee in Boston, working at Harvard University. He went back to Philippines in dangerous times, was shot dead on the tarmac. And his wife took over the mantle of the struggle for freedom. And freedom happened in the Philippines. Many years later, it was South Korea under Kim Dae-jung, who got into office in December 97. And by the time when Kim Dae-jung campaigned against the candidate of the military, there was already some innovation in international communications. There are no yet social media. By then, CNN was becoming ancient, but there were new innovations, and that was SMS. So hundreds of thousands of new voters, young voters, were mobilized through SMS to vote for Kim Dae-jung. And a civilian, a Democrat, who all his life, more than 30 years, fought for freedom of South Korea, he won. And that was 97. That coincided also financial economic crisis in Southeast Asia, in East Asia. Those of you who study economics and study international relations, you might recall this first major financial crisis that hit the so-called tiger economies. But to tell you a bit about boasting, and because literally I'm boasting, and you have to forgive, some of my sins. One of my sins is boasting something. And what did I boast? I was interviewed first time ever for CNN, sometime in May 95. It was a young American intern in Geneva. We met. And then years later, she became an intern at CNN in New York. She lobbied her boss, Richard Roth, the producer and presenter of Diplomatic License, a weekly program with CNN, to put me on CNN. This young woman, so Richard Roth then contacted me. He wanted to do a program on East Timor. Interviewed me, May 95. And what did I say in the interview? May 95, remember, don't forget, I'm saying May 95. And within 2 to 3 years, the Suharto regime will fall under the weight of economic crisis, corruption, mismanagement of the economy, and the increasing illegitimacy. I use this word. May 95, the interview was aired. May 98, 20 May, 21 May, Suharto fell. So, exactly as I had said. But during that interview, Richard Roth had talked with the Indonesian ambassador, a very refined gentleman, Wisnu Mutri, Javanese. He looked like a Javanese aristocrat, very decent man. And Richard Roth put to him, Mr. Ambassador, President Mr. Ramos-Horta said, within 2 to 3 years, Suharto regime will fall. So Wisnumoto responded, well, Mr. Ramos-Horta is always too optimistic. So that was his answer. On occasion in the past, I was called by the then Indonesian Foreign Minister, Ali Alatas, very witty gentleman, very energetic, brilliant diplomat. He called me, I was an unemployed agitator. He was right, because I was basically unemployed, because I didn't have a fixed job. To survive in New York, I worked in an Indian restaurant, not as a waiter or anything. I knew the owner. As not a great restaurant. The food was actually terrible. And, but we became friends. We lived near each other. Then he knew I was in trouble with money, so you come and work in my restaurant. You just sit in front at the entrance. For if anyone well-known you come and call me. So that I come rush here to greet them. So you pay me $100 a week. I survive with doing translations from French, Spanish, Portuguese, these 3 languages, to English. For a church organization situated in 475 Riverside Drive, remember that, up in Upper Columbia University area. And travel all over the US, all over Europe, and then one day, following this crisis that happened in Indonesia, and then I won the Nobel Peace Prize. I forgot about that. And the Nobel Peace Prize threw open the doors, elevated the status of the question of East Timor. I start having audience in the State Department senior level. I then, a few years later, got to meet President Bill Clinton and all of that. I mentioned Bill Clinton because he was instrumental. He was very positive, good man, brilliant, a genius, a great speaker. He brought changes to the United States, brought changes to U.S. foreign policy. And from day one, when he was elected in '92, he began qualitative change on Timor-Leste. Then we fast forward 25 years after the referendum. Where are we? Because what is the value of independence? To have a flag, a national anthem, ministers, presidents, driving luxurious cars. The value of freedom, yes, real freedom where people live in freedom. And in this regard, we have not failed. Timor-Leste is rated the best democracy in Southeast Asia, one of the best in all of Asia. We are rated number 10 in media freedom in the world, better than Australia. Australia is rated 30-something. UK is 26, France 27, Germany 27, US 40-something. And there have been improvements in the lives of the people. It's not true when some idiots in the media, some idiots in the academia, because in academia there are also idiots, and that insist in writing, because those journalists, those academics who in the past did not believe in Timor-Leste independence and were actively against, today they have to prove that they were right, that Timor was not viable. And they have the audacity even to make lies about Timor economy. One of the lies is that we are dependent on Chinese largesse. Well, let me tell you one thing. Life expectancy in Timor-Leste before independence was less than 60, 57 something. Today, if you just Google the figures, is about 70. In 2002, year one of independence, we had one PhD, one Timorese with PhD. Today we have over 100. We had one university with only 10,000 students. Today we have 18 universities with 40,000 students. We have thousands of students studying in Indonesia, hundreds in Australia, across Europe and across elsewhere, in Asia, in China, several hundred studying in China, including in medicine, mathematics, and so on. A few years ago, in an international math competition at a high school level, involving 30 schools, 50,000 students, one Timorese student came number 4 in math in the world. And I was so happy that our Timorese son was number 4 and the Chinese one number 7. I said, God, we managed to beat the Chinese. And so we have made tremendous progress. In 2002, we had 20 medical doctors. Today, we have over 1,000. We didn't have a single ophthalmologist. Today, we have 13. Could be more, but we have 13. But thanks to that gentleman sitting over there, a Tasmanian from Indian background, Dr. Nitin Verma, he launched this initiative called East Timor Eye Program, supported by the Australasia College of Surgeons and Physicians, and with public-private support in Australia, not from Australian government. And they required a lot of lobby on my part for eventually the Australian government start also giving some money. But that was years ago. So the program is going on for 24 years. Yeah. They have done cataract surgeries for thousands of Timorese. Many who thought, because they didn't know the possibility of a surgery to cure cataract, they thought they were blind for years. And then suddenly they saw the light of the day again. So that is your compatriot, Dr. Nitin Verma, who is also the honorary consul of Timor-Leste here in Tasmania. We have a bit of oil and gas, nothing like Australia, and not counting the oil field that Australia depleted. 4 oil fields in the north that Australia graciously depleted before handing over to us, following the agreement on the final maritime boundary, which established the median line between us and Australia. But in 2005, we set up a sovereign fund, a petroleum fund, sovereign fund, and at the time our law stipulated that 90% of revenues would go to would be invested in US Treasury bonds, 10% in diversification, but because we didn't have much experience at the time, 100% went to US Treasury bonds. And the revenues from the oil and gas would not go to government treasury. It would go to the fund. The government had no authority on its own to access the money. It had to go through the parliamentary system, the budget system, by defending in the parliament, withdrawing the money from the sovereign fund to support the budget for infrastructure, education, and so on. It is with this sovereign fund that over the years we improve electrification of the country. In 2002, electricity was only in Dili, the capital, and bad. Today it covers 97+% of the country. And it is this sovereign fund that has made us 100% independent in financing our development. Bilateral assistance from France is minimum. We don't have a single cent of direct budget support. We have support for programs from the donor countries in consultation with us. We have only 16% of debt to financial institutions. And who are they? Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and the IFC. We owe no money to commercial banks. we are not a debtor to China. So we are financially so far very independent and will be more independent still if finally this year we reach an agreement with Australia, with a joint venture to develop a bigger gas field called Greater Sunrise. Economic prosperity has not come, knock at our door, but has improved, independence has improved the lives of many, many of our people. Timorese would never dream going to study in Southeast Asian best universities in Australia, because there were times when scholarships from Timorese, our government, were many more than scholarships granted by Australian aid. We had more students in Portugal paid by our own budget than by Portugal, etc., etc. So the money from oil has benefited tremendously our country, our people. So these are some of the gains from freedom, from independence. Liberty, dynamic democracy, we have zero political crime, zero political violence. Tranquility in the country, we have zero ethnic-based, religious-based tensions. So not even tensions. We have a lot of political tensions. That's normal in a democracy. There should be tensions in academic debate, in a university, in the scientific world. So there are in politics, but no political violence in my country. And we don't have even organized crime. We don't have organized crime partly because, to be in organized crime, you have to be a people who is super organized. We improvise a lot in my country. We are not. Organized crimes in the region don't trust Timorese. Because actually a few years ago, there was some organized crime in the region. They tried to have some partners in Timor-Leste, and they did have one Timorese guy. And the Timorese guy, very amateur, very unprofessional, and he told the police that they were printing money in Jakarta. And the Indonesian side didn't believe. But with agreement from Indonesia, our own police, with the Indonesian police, went to Jakarta, everything filmed in their helmet, and went right into the building where they're printing the money. For this reason, organized crime no longer trusts any Timorese, so they don't want to work with Timorese on organized crime. So this is the country. Come and visit us. I think I've already passed the half hour allocated to me. I'll be happy to answer questions. Any question on any international issue. Number one, Myanmar, Gaza, Ukraine, or the conflict in Africa, like in Congo, in Sudan, South Sudan, in Yemen, the ongoing challenges in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Libya, I'm happy to comment on. And maybe my comments or my answer do not satisfy, do not mean a resolution of the problem. But I finalize only by saying I left office first time in 2012. The Secretary General of the UN then invited me to go to West Africa as his special representative to manage some conflicts in the region. I did, successfully. Then he invited me again to chair a panel called High-Level Panel on UN Peace Operation. I did that. We had tremendous international applause, but like many great academic dissertations, I had warned my colleagues who were with me doing the panel, we might produce a report that would be acclaimed with summa cum laude in some universities, but like many of the PhD dissertations, will gain dust in some library. And ours could be gaining dust in the UN library, which would be even worse because no one goes to the UN library. So we had this report, which was subject to discussion in the Security Council. I went there to the General Assembly and did very little to meet the goals of our terms of reference. Our terms of reference was to anticipate the new security challenges in the coming decade, to prepare the UN to address these situations, to prevent conflicts. That was one of the main, prevent conflict prevention. All of this failed. We failed, so we failed Gaza, we failed to prevent the new war in Palestine, we failed to prevent the war in Ukraine, etc. Why? Prevention is almost like a cliche. Everybody talk about it's much better to prevent than to try to resolve it. But yeah, but we never succeed in preventing a conflict. They always happen. Why that? I might be able to answer why that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, President Ramos-Horta, for your inspiring, stimulating, wide-ranging and incredibly good-humoured reflections on your career, your journey, the life of your country, and the immense contributions that you have made. It's been a great pleasure for us to benefit from your insights, and I know from around the room here in Hobart there are going to be a large number of questions. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that wonderful talk. My name is Alison Merridew. My father was part of the peacekeeping force that went to Timor-Leste in 2000. He was a medical officer there. My question, you just mentioned about some of the really significant current conflicts, particularly in Gaza and Congo and Sudan. And I guess it's difficult not to be cynical about those sorts of conflicts and to think, oh, all of it's just because people want to get access to the minerals or the oil or the gas or things like that. As somebody who's seen a lot over many decades, and you mentioned sort of organised international hypocrisy, but you've also seen a successful outcome for Timor-Leste. I just wonder if you have a view on, is that the case? Is it always about resources, or are there other factors that ultimately are very telling in what the outcome eventually is for those big conflicts?
We might take a group of questions for His Excellency. So a further question, please.
My name is Doug Cooper. I first heard you speak, Mr. President, 48 years ago at Cornell University when I was a student there. I'm a longtime supporter of East Timorese independence and self-determination. I certainly welcomed the fall of the decaying Salazarist dictatorship in Portugal that helped open the door to independence for Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, and East Timor too, all the Portuguese colonies. Since 2015, Timor-Leste representatives at the UN have voted 129 times and abstained 8 times on anti-Israel resolutions in the General Assembly. My question to you is, do you support Israel's right to exist and to defend itself from terrorist attacks like the one we saw a year ago on October 7th?
Thank you for the question, and I think we'll take one more in this first batch of questions, please.
My name's Julian Punch. I'm involved in the Tasmanian Friends of Timor-Leste. My question is, how can we improve the exchange between our two countries? We've got a wonderful program in terms of the fruit pickers in in Tasmania, and it's a wonderful exchange of young people between Timor and Australia. Are there other ideas that we can progress?
Thank you very much for those three questions. And President Ramos-Horta, I think I may just take a further question from our online audience. And the President's just asked me to briefly summarise the three questions. So we have a question about the challenges of conflict in our world, their drivers, and in particular your views on the role of resource conflicts and potential opportunities for resolution. A question about your country's stance on Israel and its response to the attacks that it has suffered, and your views on Israel's responses. And then a question from the side which was focused on the opportunities for Australia and Timor-Leste to continue engagement, including amongst our young people. And the example that was highlighted were agricultural workers coming and gaining experience here in Australia. And then perhaps, President Ramos-Horta, there is a range of questions that have come through here asking for your perspective on the hopes for Palestinian self-determination and the role that the international community can play. So 4 big themes for you. Over to the President.
The first question, of course, there are many factors that motivate people's leaders to take the next step in a conflict situation. Conflict situation in the sense of perceptions, desires, ambitions, etc. Vis-a-vis something, vis-a-vis a territory. Sometimes motivation, the action people takes, has to do with fear. Fear that may be based on real facts or just perception, or whatever. Yes, of course, there is economics also involved. Resources, you know. One example, for instance, when Iraq first invaded Kuwait, well, it had to do with the resources of Kuwait. And there's nothing else. It was not religions, it was not ideology, it was, and it was a total catastrophe. That was the end of the Iraqi regime when it began, when it invaded Kuwait, total failure, the invasion, the strong international reaction, and they were defeated. They had to leave. And other situations is very little to do with economics. It is more in terms of the country that decide to invade or to take action has their own genuine fear in relation to potential threats, encroachment into that country security area. I give you an example. For instance, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Khrushchev had this brilliant, quote-unquote, brilliant idea because Russia, Soviet Union didn't have enough intercontinental ballistic missiles to present a threat against the US from their soil. So you do a simple thing. Transport your missiles to Cuba. That's an insanity decision by Fidel Castro to accept that. So bringing the missiles to Cuba, that's already a shortcut. Well, how the U.S. feel about that? And the Soviet missiles in Cuba, and they were there. And John Kennedy said, you leave. If you don't, I bomb you. And they left. So nothing to do with economics. Was it perception that the U.S. presents a threat to Soviet Union? I don't think so at that time. Of course, U.S. had weapons in European soil as a result of World War II. So a threat to Soviet Union. So there are many reasons, and sometimes, whatever the reason you have, there is miscalculation. Miscalculation by one side in regards to the other side's strength, the other side's resolve to fight back. You miscalculate your adversary. You overcalculate your resources, your possibilities. Well, putting the invasion of Ukraine is a miscalculation. There were genuine fears, obviously, if you look at the history, going back to the Berlin Conference, the conference between Chancellor Kohl, Gorbachev, Reagan, in the post-Cold War, for the dismembering of the Warsaw Pact, the dismemberment of the Berlin Wall, what was supposedly have promised to Gorbachev. And Gorbachev was a darling of the West. He himself said that NATO would not expand to the neighborhood of Russia. But that also means the West miscalculated Putin, that he would not dare invade Crimea. But in the view of the events taking place in Ukraine, and with NATO countries already, all, the Baltic states and everywhere, NATO countries, the fear that Crimea would fall into NATO's hands, well, that is a strong motivation. And he did invade, caught the Europeans by surprise. So that's nothing to do with economics. But both sides underestimate each other. Putin misjudged. He tried, succeeded with Crimea. The Europeans were caught by surprise. There is no way in the world that NATO, the Europeans, America, were going once again to shrug. That would be an impossibility. So the other one is...
Next up is Israel. Israel.
Israel. Well, let me tell you this. I was always afraid of Israel, as I was always a friend of the Palestinians. I visited Israel in my first term in office as president. I was invited by Shimon Peres. I went there. He hosted a formal lunch for me. I met with Netanyahu. He was already prime minister at the time. I met with Foreign Minister Lieberman, someone in the past I watched him on television. I would never meet this man. Lieberman apparently was night security in some Moscow nightclub. He was a security, like standing at the door, and a security. Then migrated to Israel and became foreign minister. And then I met with the leader of Knesset. I met many people. I had tremendous, but I also went to Ramallah, West Bank. And I probably was the first and only head of state that went to Israel and then from there traveled overland to West Bank. Usually the Israelis don't like that. If you want to go, leave the country, go to Paris, go to Amman, and then go get another flight to go. But I was not in mood to fly to Paris, whatever, and I told the Israelis, I don't have a private airplane, so why don't they just let me go? Are we friends or we are not? So anyway, they relented, and I did go. accompanied by heavy Israeli security, and I was delivered on the other side of the security zone, delivered to the Palestinians. And so I went to Ramallah. At the time, the situation was relatively cool, relaxed. There was optimism, and I had meetings with all the Palestinian leaders, and all sides. Everybody agree. Israelis, Palestinians, they all agree. The only problem in the Middle East, they said, was Iran. Iran is the only problem. So anyway, just to say it as an initial point is that I was a friend, I was and a friend of Israelis, a friend of Jewish people, and a friend also of the Palestinians and of many Arabs around the world, in Middle East, everywhere. But time comes when we as a human being, you cannot be silent. You cannot, in the name of your friendship, you cannot, in the name of possible national interest, your own prejudices of your fear, do not take a stand when so many innocent people are killed. I condemn the action taken by Hamas. I understand the background that led to that moment. I understand that. But that is not a justification to kill innocent people. Because when you fight for freedom, for dignity of your own people, supposedly you're fighting against someone who is doing horrible things to your people. You kill innocent people, you are descending to the gutter, you are descending to the level of those you are denouncing, you are fighting against. No. And because, let me say, Hamas did not only kill Israelis. Way back in the beginning of the Camp David Accord, when the Palestinian Authority was established, Hamas always wanted to control Gaza, wanted to control West Bank, ousted the Palestinian Authority from Gaza, and they threw Palestinian leaders from buildings down to the street, crashing in the street. So they are not angels. But when Israel, instead of thinking through what should be our action, what should we do, they do carpet bombing of Gaza, total destruction of Gaza. According to British medical doctors, more than 100,000, the calculation made by them, they said it's not 40,000, more than 100,000 Palestinians died, of which majority women and children. You cannot find also justification for that. That's, so, I am sorry. So that is, but, and then what is the solution? What is the solution? Well, hopefully one day some leader in Israel emerge, someone of the standing of Mahatma Gandhi, someone on the vision of Mandela, someone would emerge among the Palestinians, the same caliber, same stature of Mahatma Gandhi, of Mandela, and say enough is enough. Because only leaders with charisma, only leaders with courage, with authority that come from their daily lives, from their life, have this moral authority to tell people end the war. Mandela, 27 years in prison, I met Mandela. I could tell you the story how I met Mandela, but it would be too long. And, and he left prison, And who was his honored guest in the banquet, the first banquet? His prison guard sat next to him. But also was pragmatic on the part of Mandela. God, you want to build a new South Africa on hatred, on a new cycle of persecution of the white minority? No, he didn't. He was compassionate, he was visionary, and pragmatic. And that happened also with us in Timor-Leste, with Shanana. You know, I'm not the real leader of the country. Sometimes I'm presented as I'm the one who saved the country. No, Shanana Guzman, he's the one who led our country to independence. He was 17 years, 18 years fighting in the mountains, 8 years prisoner. His popularity was enormous in the country. He said, we must move forward. No revenge, no persecution of anyone on the other side. We embrace our former enemies, internal, local, and also walk over to the Indonesian side, embrace Indonesia. That is possible when the leader is charismatic, he has authority, and he tells the people, and people then follow.
President Ramos-Horta, if we could have a quick response to our question on Australia, Timor-Leste engagement, particularly among our young people. And then I'm going to be bold and I'm just going to invite one further question from the audience. But before we do, Australia, Timor, young people.
We have an excellent relationship, Australia and Timor-Leste. Australians, Australians, I'm talking about Australians, and Australians are of such a rich diversity. All of you who build up this country over many generations, welcoming people from all over the world. Difficulties through the history, and we know that, but you have built a prosperous, democratic country, a rock-solid democracy. Australia actually is a mid-sized power. Australia is not the United States, is not a superpower. And but if you look at the diplomatic history, recent ones, even small countries like Norway, like Sweden, to some extent, Switzerland, small countries have been able to have mediated conflicts where big powers created conflict and big powers did not succeed. Sometimes individuals resolve problems. I know the details of some of the cases. Like in Guatemala, the civil war in Guatemala was ended by one single person, a Norwegian Lutheran bishop of Oslo, Gunnar Stoltset. He is the one who single-handedly got all the sides to talk. And when the process was advanced, he didn't have the resources, the logistics, so he talked to the Norwegian government took over. So individuals, civil society, where governments fail, in many conflicts, there are many NGOs. The Vatican, often they use a group called Community of Santo Egidio. They have done tremendous work around the world. And I have discussed with His Holiness Papa Francisco repeatedly about Myanmar. And then I went to see the Community of Santo Egidio in Rome. And they would be the right people to mediate the conflict in Myanmar before it spiraled out of control. So Australia can do more by mobilizing some countries, work with Indonesia, maybe with South Korea, with one or two Europeans, another group, African, and pick on issues that Australia could make a huge difference. Australia could make a huge difference, for instance, in launching a new international economic social initiative. For instance, an initiative to write off the debt of the most indebted third world countries. That's one. And cannot be only that. Mobilize trillions of dollars that exist, the dollars are there, for a new vision, a new Marshall Plan. I use Marshall Plan just to make it easier. Focus on eliminating poverty in the world. Bringing clean water, fresh water to every village. Bringing education, computers, IT to schools around the world. Reforest the world. Clean the rivers, the lakes, the seas that we mess with poison over many generations. This, would mobilize the world. That's what Australia could do.
Thank you very much, President Ramos-Horta. I'm going to fit in one final question, and we'll have it stated succinctly from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President, for your remarks today. My name is Himanshu Hardikar. I'm a former graduate of the university. My question is about how do small countries in the Indo-Pacific, such as Timor-Leste, such as Papua New Guinea, how do they guarantee economic security from a pragmatic perspective? Because you spoke about financial independence, but the IMF insists that you need greater private sector involvement, that you need growth in the economy, but that's difficult to achieve without countries, like you said, like Australia, wiping out debt, or countries like China or the US getting involved with political agendas. So how can smaller countries build their own economic, financial future and chart a secure pathway to it?
Well, big countries like the US, technically speaking, the US is, I don't want to offend Americans, but the US is like a bankrupted country. And the deficit is $34 trillion deficit. And it prints money, it manages, because obviously, many monies around the world, they think where I'm going to put our money, where I'm going to invest, it's safe. Dollar is still considered the safest bet. But small countries with our own resources, and the resources that don't have to be oil and gas, many have been incredibly successful. Example, Costa Rica. Costa Rica doesn't have oil, gas, or diamonds or so. It's one of the most prosperous countries in Latin America, in the world. It doesn't even have an army. Maybe because it never had an army. It has only a police force. And then in West Africa, Cape Verde. Cape Verde, former Portuguese colony, far poorer than Timor-Leste or Costa Rica. But they have one of the highest social economic indicators in the whole of Africa. Is actually life expectancy in Cape Verde and South Africa are the highest in African continent. And by the way, as an example to tell you, if you look at the UNDP social and economic indicators, one of which being life expectancy, Timor-Leste has higher life expectancy than every single country south of Sahara, exception being only South Africa and Cape Verde. And we, in only 20 years, coming from where we came, from a total destruction in 99. So it is possible. Of course, we benefit from some oil and gas, and that we have managed very carefully. A Norwegian institute that monitor transparency, integrity of sovereign funds, classify the Timor-Leste sovereign fund as the best managed in Asia, the third best in the world, the way we manage the sovereign fund. Right now, 60% of our sovereign fund is invested in U.S. Treasury bonds. 40% we diversify since the last 10 years. And and we invest in equities in the financial market in more than 1,000 portfolios that have returned to us since we have done this investment about $8 billion in return, even more than so when I hear sometimes some of the brilliant or unbrilliant people say Timor-Leste is on a financial cliff, no, well, it is the opposite. So small countries can do that. In general, the Pacific Islands have done reasonably well. There is no civil war, no conflict there. And this program that Australia has of seasonal workers coming, that's very important for the Pacific Islands and for us. For Timor-Leste, one of the best source of income for families is our people who are in UK. Last year, they sent $110 million to their families, directly to the families. Between South Korea and Australia, Timorese were there, total about $70 million last year. If Australia's side were to be more generous and looking at some of the unfair practices by employers, much more money would go to Pacific Island families, much more money would go to Timorese families.
I think you'll all agree that this has been an enlightening and indeed inspiring discussion. And Mr. President, simply a wonderful chance for all of us to benefit from your experience and wisdom. President Ramos-Horta, thank you to you and to your team for the contribution to tonight's Island of Ideas. It has, I think as everybody here would agree, been an absolute privilege and honour for us all. Thank you once again for visiting the University of Tasmania, and thanks to all of you for making this such a special event. On that note, please everybody have a happy and safe evening. Good night to one and all. Thank you.